Tonight I'd buy a Bentley. Forza crashes a lot. GT7 revs up. And I do a thing.
And on that bombshell, what better way to begin the 2021 roundup video than with some little Top Gear humour. So thanks to Octavio from the Discord server for editing that up for me. That was a great little intro, a lot of fun. And for those of you who are new to these videos, I like to release this one special video at the end of each year to thank you, to welcome the new people, to look back on some of the most notable things which happened in the year, which for some of you may actually trigger some of your own memories that you might have forgotten as well, and even to talk about a couple of things which I think may even benefit some of you to do with mental health and various other things that have happened in my life outside of YouTube that I haven't talked about on the channel. Now, first of all, of course, we're going to run through this in month-by-month order, in essentially chronological order. But first of all, let's take a brief look back to 2020 to check in on my predictions, because this, of course, is one of the most fun things that many of you like to help out on and give your own predictions as to how the channel's going to do in the following year. Now, back in 2020, in December, in that final video, I predicted that this year I would hit 80,000 subscribers, because last year we ended with 67,000. So I predicted 80,000 subscribers and 27 million views. Well, we have far surpassed those numbers, especially when it comes to the subscriber count, because as you can see right below this video, yesterday or the day before, we officially cracked 83,000 before the end of the year. So a fantastic end of year gift for me. Welcome to the additional 3,000 of you on top of what I predicted. And of course that means that we've got about 16,000 new people in this little community this year. Now obviously because of the way that YouTube works and because of the wide variety of different kinds of automotive content that I do, not everyone watches everything. And it also doesn't help, as I said, that YouTube stops showing videos to people if you don't watch certain ones, which kind of creates this self-harming cycle of not getting the views that videos should be getting. But of course that could turn into a full-on rant, and even though it's a justified rant, this video is trying to be a little bit more positive than that. So what are my predictions for 2022? Well, funnily enough, when I looked briefly back over that 2020 video, one of my biggest predictions or speculations was what Gran Turismo 7 coming out this year could have meant for the channel, because we kind of thought it was going to, but then of course it got delayed until 2022, and now we do have a release date for it in March. So once again, I'm going to shift that prediction to being that Gran Turismo 7 in 2022 rather than 2021 could potentially do a lot for the channel. I mean, even the breaking news stuff does very well on the channel, so in the following year, who knows how well tunes, reviews, gameplay is going to do as well. So my predictions for 2022 are that conservatively, because I always like to be conservative with my expectations and predictions, I believe that we're going to round out the year with 96,000 subscribers, which is excruciatingly close to what I could be, predicting, but I'm not going to quite predict that we're going to hit six figures in 2022, because that would be very disappointing if we don't. So I'm going to say 96,000, poetically close, and I believe we'll crack about 32 million views. So of course, we'll have to see if that actually happens, but for now, based on each of my year's predictions, they have been greater than my prediction every time. More views, more subscribers, so we'll have to see if that trend continues, because obviously it's always great to overachieve than under. Now, what actually happened this year? Well, the very first thing that I'm going to mention on the list was not in a video, and this is one of those things that's more of a behind-the-scenes issue, or not an issue, but something that happened. Some of you already know about this, but the prior year, back in 2020, I of course had a motorcycle crash, and I made a video about that. Thankfully it wasn't crazy serious, but it was enough to shake me up at the time, and I haven't actually ridden a motorcycle since then. I plan to at some point again, but I just honestly haven't even got around to it at this point. But this year I had a car crash. So now I've ticked both boxes. I've crashed a bike and a car, survived both times, but unlike the bike, which was thankfully a very, very low-speed crash, about 20 miles an hour at most, but still enough to throw me over the front of the bike, as many of you will remember, this one was much more significant, let's put it that way. I did a little bit of work for a dealership delivering cars to customers, to try out something a little bit different. And I delivered a few vehicles, and there always seemed to be something that would go wrong with every delivery, almost like I had bad luck with these cars, or maybe just the cars themselves weren't great. But this one particular vehicle was a Porsche Boxster that I was taking to London to show this potential customer and then drive it back to the dealership. And it was basically just a viewing, and this particular dealership offers that for people who want it. So I drove this car to London, customer viewed it and liked it, and this was back in January, so right at the start of the year, of course. When I drove on my way back, basically as soon as I'd gotten out of London, driving towards home again, when you pretty much recently joined the motorway, or the highway, for our American friends, it was very snowy. And the snow had began as I was entering London, and where I live there was no snow at all. So initially I thought they were just salting the roads on the way in, but then you could kind of see, well actually no, the fields and the trees are white as well, so clearly they're not just salting the roads, it is full-on snowing in London. Then on the way out of London, I was just driving, as you would, heading back, and I felt the back end of this Porsche Boxster lift a little bit on the road. And then it started to float to the left, and I corrected a little bit to the right, and it started floating to the right, and then I corrected it to the left, and it started floating a little bit back. Now, of course, I've played enough racing games to know that you shouldn't do any severe corrections, try and keep the car as straight as possible until it gets over that sliding stage. That wasn't an option here, because the car basically just started to go into a full-on spin, and the last thing I remember was facing oncoming traffic at 70 miles an hour in a Porsche. And the car, because I'd at that point gone full lock to the left to just try and, lock in the steering and put it into some kind of spin rather than even attempting to correct it at this point, the car, of course, swung back around because of the steering facing all the way left, and then slammed into the concrete central reservation of the motorway at about 60, 70 miles an hour. And the last thing I recall is the car swinging back that way. When I came to, it was somebody, some kind person, speaking through the window of the car saying, "Are you all right, mate?" And that obviously woke me up. I was covered in glass from the driver's side window, which I believe I'd put my head through, knocking myself out, because the only injury I had from the crash was a large bump on the side of my head, which was quite tender for a while, so I strongly believe that I put my head through the driver's side window. The back end of the car was destroyed. The rear wheels were folded completely underneath, Back to the Future style. All of the airbags had deployed on that side of the car. And thankfully, and to this day this is still kind of a mystery to me, but thankfully I was wearing a very thick hoodie and a very thick leather jacket. So I was essentially armoured at the time. Despite that, and I even posted a picture of this a while back, I believe it was on Facebook, I'm not sure about Instagram, something went straight through my leather jacket, like it was nothing. So I'm glad that I was wearing that leather jacket, because for a period of days after the crash, I had a bruised rib, or it felt at least like the skin above the rib was bruised. So whatever had cut through that leather jacket had also hit with enough force to go through the hoodie and to still hurt my rib. So to this day I don't know exactly what that was, but the only thing logically which makes sense to me is that the airbag panel on the driver's side door probably opened up when the airbag came out, but because it was more of a side impact where the inertia is all going to the right rather than back or forward, I think I probably impaled myself on the airbag panel with enough force to go through the jacket. Now that doesn't sound likely to me, but there's literally nothing else in the car that could have done it. The glass from the window couldn't have done it. Nothing came through from the back, because honestly, that's what it looked like. If you'd have told me that, oh, actually, you narrowly escaped you know, being impaled by a camshaft coming through the engine or something, then I wouldn't have been at all surprised, because it looked like that kind of hole in the jacket. But to this day, it's still a mystery. Thankfully, I came off okay. I was still taken into the hospital to do some scans because I had blacked out, and I had a bad head for a while afterwards, you know, bruising-wise. But yeah, that was a hell of a way to start the year. So significantly worse than the motorcycle crash, but unlike the motorcycle crash, I wasn't shaken up at all. I wasn't in shock. As soon as I came to, I just got out the car and was walking around, collected my stuff and got into the ambulance. And it shows that I must have been sat there on the motorway, knocked out for quite some time, because when I did wake up, all of the traffic, all 3 lanes had stopped completely and were waiting, and there was a highway maintenance guy cordoning off traffic. You can't do that in like 60 seconds, so clearly I was out for some time. Ultimately, it wasn't a scary experience, to be honest. It sounds scarier when reciting it. At the time, of course, my family and friends were shaken up by it, as you would be. But yeah, I guess it's all experience. It certainly made me drive differently after that, because I wasn't driving like a nutter anyway. But, you know, mid-engine rear-wheel drive Porsche, there you go. Going back home, when I had gotten back home on a train, was it was an experience getting back into the Jag XKR after that, because obviously, though not mid-engined, it was still January, still winter weather, driving a rear-wheel drive, significantly more powerful car than a Porsche Boxster, so it definitely made me more cautious of driving for a while. But yeah, I've spent a lot of time in the video talking about that, so we'll probably have to run through some of these other things a bit quicker. But staying in January again, though, we actually also did some great stuff. The very first Beards and Cars review of the year, the Maserati Gran Turismo. What a fantastic way to start the year. I did the first ever Beards and Cars real-world, real-life rivals match between 2 Jag XKRs, the 4.2 and the 5 litre. Still the most popular episode of that I've ever done, with like 45,000 views. And that was great to see. You know, Jag XK content always does pretty well on the channel. And again, what a fantastic start to the year there. I reviewed a number of cars in January. Real cars, of course, for those who don't know that I review real cars on the channel. A Mercedes AMG GTS, a Jag S-Type R, which, interestingly, is actually the most popular single episode review of the year. Kind of crazy. I reviewed the facelifted wagon version of the Mercedes C63 AMG, and then of course we had a couple of automotive news pieces just to touch on. The Tesla Plaid was unveiled, the monstrously fast Model S, and of course, how can we forget the SSC Tuatara's fumbled speed record of like 331 miles an hour, but it wasn't 331 miles an hour, they made a mistake. Some people still think they were trying to lie. I don't. You know, if you go to the extent of trying to lie about something like that, then you don't make a mistake with the camera and the recording software. I believe it was a genuine mistake. And at the end of the day, they still ran the car up to like 300 after that anyway, or 290 or whatever the speed was they did. Then moving into February, I reviewed the first game of the year, Ducati 90th anniversary, which was dirt cheap at the time. It's actually gotten even cheaper on, I think it's the PlayStation Store or wherever it is since then. That was a cool little game, basically Ride 2 but just with Ducatis. Then I did a couple more real reviews, an Audi RS6 and an Audi S3. The S3 actually being a very significant review because that's the first hot hatch I ever reviewed on the channel. Then I did a video that was a little bit different, an open letter to Spiker. Not exactly the most important of videos, but I tried a couple of experimental videos this year that were just things that I wanted to make, regardless of the views, and that's something which, of course, I always like to do, making fake trailers, doing crazy, creepypasta stories, and as some of you have noticed, the 2 most successful videos I've ever done have nothing to do with cars. They're both just stories I wrote that have like 500,000 and 1 million views, which is a little bit disappointing when you think of it that way. Then we had the news that Gran Turismo 7 was going to be delayed until 2022. Unfortunate news, not overly surprising for Polyphony though. Then we moved into March. I reviewed the second game of the year, Monster Jam Steel Titans 2. Similar to the first game, to be honest, but a nice little fun experience. Then I released a video which I'm actually pretty proud of, and even though it only has like 1,000 views, those of you who did watch it seem to, generally speaking, enjoy it. A lot more than I thought. I thought the video was going to become a bit of a joke and a bit of a meme and people thinking like, what is this guy even doing? But I released a video called An Ode to Motorsport. And it's the first poem I've ever written. I've never even attempted writing poetry before. And I released it and people liked it. It was basically a poem all about racing and cars. And I'm actually pretty proud of that. Next up, I reviewed the Audi R8 V10 Spider, again in real life. One of the most exotic cars of the year, and funnily enough, actually one of the cars that I liked the least. I really wasn't a fan of the handling on that thing. I then reviewed the Mercedes C55 AMG, of course the SL65 AMG, which, as I said in my Car of the Year video, is the most intimidating car I've ever driven. And again, when somebody who's crashed a Porsche on the motorway in the snow tells you that just test driving a Mercedes is more intimidating than that, that should tell you everything you need to know. I then reviewed, of course, I mean, I'm not going to spoil the video, but let's just say a very high-level contender for my Car of the Year, the Range Rover SVR. Then moving into April, even though I drove them on the same day, I released the review even a few days later. I reviewed the Golf R32. Fantastic car, one of my absolute favourites of the year. And again, check out the Car of the Year video if you want to see where that one fell. I then reviewed the Mercedes C63 AMG, but the pre-facelift version, and that was the four-door, not the wagon. I then had English. I then reviewed my first ever, and also just in general drove my first ever Ferrari. So again, hell of an experience there, an F355 GTS. We then had our first proper trailer for Test Drive Unlimited 3, or TDU Solar Crown, as it's called. I know many of you, like myself, are stoked for that game as well. I then, of course, deleted the mufflers, in effect straight piped my Jag XKR. That was a lot of fun. Best thing I ever did to that car, and it's the main thing that I miss about it, to be honest. It did sound fantastic. We then had a Touareg review, the newer shape Touareg Black Edition. I then reviewed the FN2 shape Mugen Civic. That was an interesting one. You know, a kind of modern classic, a modern collector's piece to some people. Then moving into May, I started another new series. This series has dropped off a little bit, but to be honest, the reason why this series has dropped off is because the contributions have dropped off. This is very much a series that's powered by the viewer, and that is questions from viewers. We did a few of these, and for those of you who still want to submit a question, that series is still around. So if you'd like to check out one of those questions from viewers videos and send me in a question, you can absolutely do that. They're in their own playlist if you want to check those out. Then we had a trailer for Rims Motorcycle Racing. We talked about that. I then drove in real life again a Porsche Panamera E Hybrid. My second time in a Panamera, absolutely loved it. I do still prefer the GTS overall, but the Hybrid was nice. Then, of course, drove the Alfa Giulia Quadrifoglio, my first Alfa Romeo driving experience, and one hell of a way to kick that off. Fantastic car, again, one of the best of the year. I then released what could have easily been, and, well, thanks to YouTube's algorithm, should have been a much more controversial video, but wasn't really because not that many people have seen it. I made an entire video touching on the point that so many people have asked me about. Why do I like automatics more than manuals? Well, I laid out 6 reasons in one video, breaking down each and every one of why I prefer automatic gearboxes over manuals. So if you are still curious about that, then of course check that one out on the channel. I then released honestly one of my favourite videos this year, because I love making things which people find confusing into concepts that are explained in a simple, understandable way. And if you think of it this way, that's kind of how this channel got started, making speed tunes for people, you know, kids, for example, who didn't know how to tune their cars in Gran Turismo 6, making that So You Want to Be a Tuner series back in the day. This video was kind of a throwback to that. It was called Power versus Torque. What's the difference? Or something like that. And it was basically explaining what the difference between brake horsepower and torque is, and why I prefer torque. A similar kind of concept to why I prefer autos over manuals, and I really enjoyed making that video. Again, it does not have the views, but yeah, it was a fun experience. Moving then into June though, we have an interestingly new car confirmed for GT Sport at the time. Of course, the GR86 from Toyota. That arrived later, but it was confirmed in June. We then had the start of the interesting Gran Turismo 7 tidbits dropping. So it wasn't until like halfway through 2021 that we started really hearing stuff about Gran Turismo 7. And this was the interesting news that it was and is going to be released on both the PS4 and the PS5. Then in that same month, it was a pretty eventful month for gaming, the trailer for Forza Horizon 5 dropped. And of course we're going to come back to that later on as well. I then released a video that same month where I did the other modification to my Jag. I put wheel spacers on it, much more of a subtle modification than the exhausts, but that looked great as well. Then, of course, Ness released what I would argue is probably his most significant single video of the year, his top 10 facts about Gran Turismo 1. That, as I said, I believe is probably his biggest and most significant and kind of most clickable video of the year. Then we move into July. We have the MG ZS180 driven on the channel. Probably not the most exciting of cars, but my sister, for one, actually loved that episode. She loves the MG ZS180, or any ZS for that matter. And not too long after, I also reviewed the considerably quicker BMW M2 competition. We then had some more Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown news with the map and the date announced. We then had the actual arrival of the Toyota GR86 in Gran Turismo Sport. Then, of course, another huge personal thing for me, in July, I bought my second Maserati Quattroporte, which I owned at this point up until a few weeks ago, if you're watching this video close to release. So much better than the first Maserati. You know, I learned so many things from the mistake of the first one as well, and I was saying on Discord recently that I'm actually glad I made that mistake, because if I hadn't, I'd have probably just made the same mistake later, so at least I learned that early on. That Quattroporte was fantastic. Of course, I did a couple of videos on that on the channel as well. I had planned to do some modifications to it, but ended up moving on from it more quickly than that, but I have nothing but good memories of that vehicle, really. Then, of course, I reviewed that same Quattroporte, as I said, in Beards and Cars, and also, some of you might have noticed this and not really subconsciously or not really consciously noticed it, I got my first tattoo. And if you watch Beards and Cars, you'll have noticed, of course, around that time that you can see a notable difference between my arm before that point and after that point, because I got my first ever tattoo. I'll probably flash up an image of it on the screen from Instagram. But yeah, I mean, anyone who knows me personally knows that when I do things, I tend to go all in pretty quickly. You know, the first car I ever reviewed was a BMW i8, 130 grand car. First tattoo I ever got was full forearm, 4.5 hours in the chair with heavy black ink. I'm always kind of a 0 to 100 real quick kind of guy. But yeah, I'm really happy that I got the tattoo. I'm surprised that more people aren't like, what on earth is that? What's it supposed to be? But yeah, I mean, I'm super happy with it. And we're going to come back to the subject of tattoos later on in the video as well. Then into August, we had some pretty cool cars. Let's be honest, August was a very strong month for Beards and Cars. First one was the Jag XJR, very popular episode. Then the X100 shape Jag XKR, another super popular episode, and that was actually the single most requested car I'd ever had to feature on the channel. Then the E92 BMW M3, lime green wrap, roll cage, fantastic, legendary car. I then reviewed Rim's Motorcycle Racing on the PlayStation. I then reviewed the FD2 Civic, way better than the FN2, much more of a JDM icon as well. I then reviewed another one of my absolute favourites of the year, and this was a bucket list car for me, one of my favourite hot hatches of all time, a car which I'd always wanted to feature in Beards and Cars, and I'm so glad that I did, because it definitely lived up to my expectations, the Mark II Ford Focus RS. Awesome machine, absolutely loved it. And then hot on the heels of that, more Jag content with the 5-litre XK Coupe. Another one which did pretty well and which was highly requested. Then I did, rounding out August, a review for WRC10, an early access code there. I'm not a massive fan of the WRC games, to be honest. You know, they have a number of endearing qualities, but something about it just doesn't have the character of like the PS2 era stuff to me, but maybe it's just the nostalgia talking, who knows. Then moving into September, I reviewed the Mark 7 Golf R, and that was an absolute monster of a car. It was tuned to 580 horsepower, did 0 to 60 in 2.8 seconds. It was basically like driving a real-life HPA Golf from Gran Turismo. Crazy machine. And then in September, the single biggest piece of news of the whole year for many of you, depending on why you follow the channel, the Gran Turismo 7 trailer. The first trailer we'd had since 2020. We'd had bits of news and release dates and delays and that kind of stuff, but the full-on trailer. And of course we did tons of breakdowns and all that kind of juicy stuff for that. We then had news of GT7 pre-orders being available, and then I drove a very significant car for me as well in Beards and Cars, the Bentley Continental Speed. Fantastic car, and of course the influence on me that that car had, which much like the Focus RS, is one which I'd wanted to review for such a long time. I finally got the chance to, and that will come into play very soon. We then move into October though, so September was a fairly concise month for the most important stuff. We had another new Gran Turismo 7 trailer featuring even more info, and then I got very generously sent a Thrustmaster eSwap controller. That is still, spoiler alert, the controller which I use to this day. It's a fantastic bit of kit, albeit a pretty expensive one. I also got the chance to drive a BMW M4, the competition version in particular. That was a very nice car. I then drove the original shape R35 GTR, and interestingly, that is currently the most powerful car I've ever driven. It was tuned to 850 horsepower. Quick, yes, you could certainly say that. We then had back-to-back just Gran Turismo 7 after Gran Turismo 7, still in October. We had a trailer featuring the Chaparral 2J. I'm surprised more people weren't stoked for that. I certainly was. We then had a trailer teasing Apricot Hill. We had a possible Grand Valley Speedway teaser in a trailer. I believe that's still being debated. Then though we moved into November, we had the Gran Turismo 7 trailer confirming that the Mercedes AMG GTR is going to be in the game. We had the Gran Turismo 7 tuning trailer drop. Then, of course, I released the Harvey's Autos Saga video. One of the longest videos of the year, but a video which I know many of you thoroughly enjoyed listening to because it was essentially like the JM on Cars McLaren expose, but for this channel. It was the dealership that I purchased my Maserati from, and how they were just borderline criminal, absolutely inept, and how I finally managed to get my money back. Spoiler alert, I guess. So yeah, I mean, if you want to hear a good long story, just listening to it in the background, then check out that video, because it was quite the saga. Then, this is something which I actually want to put in the video to allude to what I said at the start. I don't really talk about mental health on the channel at all, because it's not really the point of the channel. But this is something which I've actually found hugely beneficial this year, a year where I've tried new things and had great new experiences, getting tattoos, driving Ferraris, but also the most traumatic experience I've technically ever been through, being in a car crash. And just mental health overall is something which my family has a history of. I'm not personally diagnosed with anything, I'm not on any kind of medication, but it wouldn't surprise me, let's just say, if it were possible to diagnose me with depression or depressive tendencies or anxiety sometimes. I found that the single most beneficial thing for me this year, honestly, and this is something which you hear a lot of people talk about, and even myself was like, yeah, sure, whatever, and then I actually tried it, and that is journaling. Essentially like a diary, if you want to call it that. Writing in a notepad, notebook, journaling book. I went out and bought one. It wasn't expensive, but it felt special. It was just for that purpose. Get a pen or a pencil that you like, and literally just write something every day. I started doing that on the same day that I released that Harvey's Autos video, the 8th of November. I haven't missed a day since, and I don't plan to. And I've found that it is massively beneficial for my mental health. And it's not in the most noticeable of ways. It doesn't mean that I don't have bad days. It doesn't mean that I don't get down. It doesn't mean that I don't have really bad depressive episodes despite having such great things happening on the channel. It just, for me, has the biggest single benefit of keeping things in perspective. Because one of the most negative things that happens with depression, even for someone like me who's not even clinically diagnosed with anything like that, is that you dwell on the negative exclusively. And it becomes even a snowball that just grows and grows with more and more negativity. You have to break that. Some people break that with medication. Some people break it with therapy. I find that at least to some degree, a way for me to break that is by actually noting down how I'm feeling and things that have happened mostly every day. Because then it actually helps me to remember, well, actually, if you look through these days, half of this stuff you would have forgotten about. But there were so many great days here. So many things that you're really glad you did. So many things that happened that were actually really good, not just really bad. Because yes, I've dealt with some pretty big things this year, not just the car crash, stuff in personal life as well that I'm not going to get into. But dealing with those things can dominate your thoughts, and they are almost always negative. Journaling is such a simple benefit. Don't try it for a couple of days and give up. Try it for at least a couple of weeks. If you give it a couple of weeks, I think you'll find yourself making it a couple of months. And eventually, it will become a beneficial habit. And it helps to actually put your thoughts to paper. I am very much a verbal processor, so I literally talk to myself a lot, especially when I go out on walks. And it's not so much talking to yourself, it's more talking out loud with no one else there. Those are two different things. And to me, that helps a lot. It helps to hear my own thoughts in terms of processing them. Journaling has the same effect. You can put down your thoughts, nobody's going to judge them except you, and even then, you don't even have to judge yourself. It's almost like once it's written, you can turn the page, forget that day, and never have to look at it again if you don't want to. It almost gives each day a finality to it once you've put it to paper, in effect turning it into a chapter of a story. And it has so much more benefit than I thought it would have. So if you take nothing else away from this video, and if you've even got this far in the video, please try that out if you don't already. Even if you just give it a trial run. Because it's not like it even costs anything. Just a bit of paper and a pen. Next up, though, we began Forza Horizon 5 tuning. And of course, I've done quite a few of those. Some have great views, some have barely any, and that is going to continue on the channel. Of course, it did for Forza Horizon 4 as well. I'm not as much of a Forza channel. I've done a lot of Forza videos, but I'm more known for Gran Turismo. But yeah, I do always especially like to provide tuning there. I then, another huge personal milestone for me, I published my third book, my third horror novella. And honestly, I think it might actually be my personal favourite of the three that I've done so far. Buddy is the most popular that most people have read of mine so far, which is more psychological. Then I did Spore, which is my love letter to monster movies. And then this third one, Those That Remain, is my take on the zombie apocalypse. But it's smaller, it's more personal, more drama-based, more claustrophobic. And I'm really happy with it. In fact, of my three books, if I had the chance to turn any of them into a short movie or a series or an episode of something, it would be that one, because the budget wouldn't be too crazy and I think people might like it. Then, though, we had some more car action. 3 cars in one day from Philip Raby. The Aston DB7, which was the biggest surprise that I had of the year in terms of cars that I was driving. That was great. The Jag XKRS 5 litre. Of course, another very important one for the XK lineage on the channel. And I reviewed my first ever full-on classic. Yes, I've looked at a 1990 Rolls-Royce in the series, but this was way older than that. A 1973, I believe it was, Ford Cortina. That was a really cool little experience, a charming little car, and a totally different kind of review. Because, it's not like I'm telling you what you should be looking out for when buying a used one. It's, as I said in that video, it's the most I've ever felt like Jay Leno's garage. And that was such a lot of fun to do. Then, though, moving into December, of course this month, so much easier to remember half of this stuff, I reviewed the Vauxhall Corsa, the VXR. Yeah, bit of a chav chariot, but it was a fun experience, and the car did surprise me by how good it was. The Abarth 595, very, very popular little car in the UK, and I can see why. We then had Deep Forest showcased in Gran Turismo 7, of course, that Lamborghini cockpit cam video. That was probably, from what I've seen as a creator at least, the single most controversial piece of Gran Turismo 7 news that we had all year. Of course, one of the controversial things was it being on PS4 and PS5. Obviously, the release date being delayed was controversial or disappointing, but this one, in terms of just the game itself, I saw a lot of people who didn't really like the way that Deep Forest looked, and that was interesting. We then, of course, had the final reveal, finally, of the Porsche Vision Gt. Some people were underwhelmed. You know, some people don't really care about the Vision GTs anyway at this point, which I can kind of understand. I then did the Maserati vlog, which ironically was literally a couple of days before I sold the Maserati, where I was talking about changing my car in that video. And then, right at this point in December as well, going back to the point of tattoos, I got my second tattoo. Another all-in kind of tattoo, same tattoo artist, the same style. All of my tattoos, I'm only planning on getting 3 technically, they're all the same style. And this one actually took an hour less, despite being my full calf, from the top of my foot to the knee, all the way around. As I said, it was an hour quicker than doing my forearm. I don't know why, maybe the tattoo artist was just more familiar with how to do it, whereas the first time he'd never done anything like that before. I will say though, even though it was an hour less work, I went through a lot more discomfort after. In fact, I nearly passed out from the tattoo because the arm was fine. You know, the elbow was a bit painful, the wrist was a bit painful, you know, anywhere where there's more bone. The leg was bad, and I thought that my leg was going to be easier because, you know, you think, your legs, you know, it's more muscle, they're more tough, they're doing work all the time, walking around. But it really wasn't. It hurt way more, especially on the back of the leg. And around, again, the ankle and the top of the foot was really painful. In fact, basically all of it was painful, to be honest, especially with the sheer amount of black ink that I was having put into my skin. I mean, my calf and my forearm are literally more black than white now. So that had a pretty bad, I would say, kind of shock reaction. My body did go into shock, but thankfully, because I had to drive home after the tattoo, and the drive home was like 4 miles, it wasn't until I got home, sat down and had something to eat, that it really kicked in. I think the adrenaline had gone away, my body knew that it could just relax and let it happen now, and I almost passed out. You know, my face went yellow, tingling running through my head, felt like I needed to throw up. I did throw up, extremely nauseous. So yeah, I went into shock about that one, and the leg didn't swell up as much as my arm did, but it was certainly an unpleasant experience for that first hour or so. After that, it was mostly just the usual, you know, swelling and dealing with the peeling. Technically, the tattoo is still in formal, kind of a healing stage at the moment, because it wasn't that long ago, but yeah, it's all good now. I'm super happy with it, and I've only got one more piece to do, and that is to complete my left arm, because my tattoo on the left arm goes from the hand to the elbow, and then I want to complete it from the elbow to my shoulder. And honestly, once that's done, that's all I plan on doing. I'm not one of these people who likes the idea of collecting tattoos everywhere. I have a very specific goal of how I want to look, and once I've achieved that, I'll be done. There are loads of people who say, nah, you won't be done, you'll have something else, and maybe I will, but for the moment, that's all I want. Moving on from tattoos though, because I'm sure some of you don't care about that anyway, but next we had another Gran Turismo 7 trailer announcing a vintage Mercedes. Well, not announcing it, but it was featured in the trailer fairly predominantly, and again, I'm a huge fan of vintage cars, so having as many of those in Gran Turismo as possible is always great for me. We then had the booklet for Gran Turismo 7 seen in Japan, I believe it was, with 2 new Ferraris seen in there, some visual tuning, and of course many of you will remember this because, again, this was very recent in December. And then, of course, I made my biggest purchase of the year. I've actually had 3 cars this year, started the year with the Jag, then bought the Maserati, and then, of course, bought what I have now, the Bentley. I bought a Bentley Continental Flying Spur, the biggest risk I've ever taken. I'm loving the car so far. It has 1 or 2 small things, as I said in that video. You know, there's a little scratch here, or maybe a bulb needs changing there, but mechanically, it's fantastic. Of course, the performance is amazing. It's a little bit thirstier than the Maserati, but honestly, not that much different in the grand scheme of things. And yeah, I love it. It's much more my kind of car, you know, big, heavy, comfortable, effortless torque. But again, I talked about that in its own video, and that will most likely be the first Beards and Cars car review of 2022. So if you want to hear my review of that, then of course stick around on the channel for that. I then did my Car of the Year 2021 video. That was a few days ago. I'm not going to, again, spoil what won or what the runners-up were, but it's usually a controversial selection of cars that I have, but of course it's a very personal list. And then I'm actually deciding to put this in the video because at the end of the day, this channel is how many of you know me anyway, and depending on where some of you live in the UK, it may actually even benefit me and my potential business to talk about this with you, for those of you who might be interested in it. I had it suggested to me by more than one family member after buying the Bentley, you know what, that looks like a wedding car. You should use that as a wedding car. And I didn't buy it as a business vehicle, I bought it just because obviously I wanted a Bentley. But I thought, you know what, it's a Bentley, it's in great condition, it's silver. Why don't I use it as a wedding car? So I'm doing just that. I've got the business cards, I've got the Facebook page, it's called The Bentley Wedding Service, and I'm operating in predominantly the southwest of the UK. So for those of you who maybe know someone who's going to be having a wedding in that area, or maybe even a little outside of that area, if you want to know prices and details and all that kind of stuff, then of course go onto Facebook and shoot me a message, or you can send an email to thebentleyweddingservice@gmail.com. And yeah, I'll answer any queries that you have about that. But yeah, it's a potential little side business idea using the Bentley. And yeah, I think compared to other wedding services, the pricing is actually far better and the value for money is far better. But overall, that's it for the roundup. That's everything that happened this year. And unless something drops in the next couple of days, which is possible, then that is the roundup of 2021. So a very eventful year. New tattoos, car crashes, mental health, journaling, crazy other things that happened in, life outside of YouTube, driving a Ferrari, having some great cars. It was an up and down year for sure. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't awful. Much like life itself, there's some of each. And balancing the two can actually end up making you a lot happier than focusing on one or the other. So if you take nothing else away from this video, then try journaling. As I said earlier on, maybe get a tattoo, but that's not the mental health side of things, that's just for fun. But overall, thank you to all of you who have joined the channel, all 16,000 of you this year. Of course, we look forward to welcoming many more people in 2022. And thank you for all of the support. Thanks to those of you who do watch everything. Thanks to those of you who enjoy the Gran Turismo content. To those of you who enjoy the Forza content, to those of you who enjoy maybe just my Jag XK videos, or anything in between, and of course thanks to Maverick, Ryan, who runs the Discord for the channel, many of you will know him over there, thanks to Ness, thanks to Nath, thanks to everyone else who's listed in the bottom of this video's description who's ever supported the channel, even financially. Thanks to all of you. Because a community and a channel is just that. It's not a one-man show. Production may be a one-man show most of the time, but the viewing experience and the success of the channel depends on everyone. So honestly, thank you all. And as I used to much more commonly thanks to the haters, because now we can't even see your dislikes, but you're still helping the algorithm. So keep doing what you're doing. Ultimately, though, thank you all for 2021, and here's looking to 2022. Overall, though, that's it for HSGear 2021. And on that bombshell, good night.